Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session at the Daring Cities Conference 2022. The session title is Partnering with Vulnerable Groups for Inclusive Local Climate Investment Prioritization and Planning. So glad to have you all here with us today. Really looking forward to this session. I just wanted to start, people are probably quite familiar with these Zoom protocols, but it doesn't hurt to just give people a little refresher. So some housekeeping rules for all of us today. Please just keep your mics muted during other people's interventions so that we don't, so we can hear them clearly. You can raise your virtual hand if you would like to come in and share anything with us today. And just a note that the session will be recorded and the recording will be made available online. You're free to keep your camera off for this session if you like, but of course it is always nice to see people's faces, so if that's possible, it's also welcome. My name is Ariana Karamalis. I am coming to you guys today from SDI, Slum Dwellers International, the secretariat in Cape Town, where I work as a program coordinator on our advocacy and resilience work. So today's session, just a brief kind of little introduction before we start and hand over to the first two speakers. Today we're really looking at participation of vulnerable groups in decision-making and governance systems and how that can lead to better prioritization of climate finance, urban in cities, the investment needs and the budget management and allocation of funds to serve the needs of the most vulnerable. And one of the key aspects that we'll be looking at, as it kind of indicates in the title, is partnerships, multi-level collaborations, which we're going to hear today are really at the core, at the heart of inclusive urban governance. So I'm gonna hand over. I'm gonna introduce our first two speakers. We have two speakers that are going to come in and share some of their experience in the climate finance sector and working to bring climate finance to the local level. So first we're going to hear from Darlington Sibanda, who's here with us from the African Center for Cities. And he's going to speak to the state of local climate finance. And then after that, we're going to hear from Ms. Anwesha Tiwari, who is a knowledge management officer at Wairu Commission. And they work with a number of grassroots groups all across the global South on a number of things, but one of their key initiatives is around climate finance and channeling that directly to those grassroots groups. So Anwesha will share with us some experience from the Wairu Commission on that. So with that, I think I will hand over first to Mr. Sibanda, who will share with us, I believe he has a PowerPoint that he's going to be sharing, and I look forward to hearing from you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Darlington Sibanda, and just for a quick correction there, Ariana, I am with the African Climate and Development Initiative at the University of Cape Town. Yeah, so I titled my presentation today as Towards Inclusive Climate Action in African Cities. Just for an introduction, I think we are all kind of aware now that the recently published sixth assessment report of the IPCC indicated that actually climate change is moving towards a warmer and unpredictable future, which is characterized by quite extreme events and trends. It has also been established that human influence is actually at the center of that, and the scale of the change is actually unprecedented, and that this change is, part of the change is actually irreversible. With that in mind, the AR4 report also indicated that actually it's the poor and the marginalized who are actually disproportionately affected by climate change. And in this way, you find that poor individuals and poor households are normally harmed by climate due to a variety of reasons, which include the fact that they don't have enough assets to recover from climate shocks and stresses. Others could be also the issue of livelihoods, which, when they have to depend on mostly climate sensitive sectors such as agriculture, forestry, fishing, and pastoralism. And particularly when you speak in the context of cities, we also look at people who are employed in low income, informal jobs. So climate adaptation responses really need to also incorporate the issue of equity. And in that way, we also need to be aware that as we intervene, especially in the context of climate change, we should not worsen inequality or increase vulnerability. Of late, in South Africa, there are projections that by 2050, between 2011 and 2050, there could be between 19 to 24 million growth in the population. And that growth would actually take place in towns and cities, which means that really the focus, as we discussed, should go towards urban areas, and there should be much more targeted attention towards that. Just to add that the poor normally live in higher exposure areas. We know about especially informal settlements where people live in poorly constructed homes and often lack basic health services and infrastructure. In that way, we need to start actually thinking about coming up with climate change projects which should actually also deliver on development goals and also contribute towards reduction of poverty and inequality. In this session, I'll just focus a little bit about on a project which I'm currently involved in. This project is called Transforming Social Inequalities Through Inclusive Climate Action. This project is a joint undertaking by 2 African Centers of Excellence, which are all hosted by the University of Cape Town. And we have regional nodes in Ghana and Kenya, and also some collaborators from 4 universities in the United Kingdom. This particular project investigates how climate action can be socially transformative, and we're trying to almost compare across these 3 countries, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. And in doing this, we're trying to address the nexus between climate change, sustainable development, multidimensional poverty, and inequality in order to tackle the overall question, how can climate action be deliberately targeted in order to improve livelihoods and also lead to equitable benefits for the most vulnerable, especially women and children. What we have already done in the project is that we have started with one of the work packages. We have a couple of work packages. One work package, we've already done some mapping. We tried to see the status quo of climate actions across these 3 countries in order to see to what extent what has been done. Sometimes when we speak about climate change, oftentimes we don't know what is actually happening in those countries. We also wanted to look at what are the sectors which are being focused on and who is funding those projects. So far, actually for South Africa, which I'm going to focus on, we found that the number of projects which we have managed to access from different databases, including the national database, there are about 652 climate change projects, of which around 56% of them were focused towards mitigation and 25% adaptation and 19% both. Then we also have projects which are on the ground. When you say on the ground, we're trying to say these projects are actually happening. They are not just policies which are developed. They are much more about transforming lives on the ground. So far, what results are showing currently, this is the map of South Africa. Many of the projects are actually concentrated in the Western Cape province as compared to other 9 provinces. And most of these projects are actually biased towards mitigation, where you have a lot of projects in around solar water heaters and many others. Also, in terms of geographical location, that there is also a tendency that about 40, while there's like 40% of the projects concentrated in urban areas, we are starting to see that many of the projects are actually concentrated in bigger cities like Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban, while the smaller kind of towns and cities are not really getting that much attention around the different climate change projects. In terms of funding, this graph here right at the bottom shows who are the key funders of these reported projects. And what is coming out right now during our mapping exercise is that the government of South Africa, across all the three spheres of government, from local, provincial, and national government, is actually taking part in funding most of these projects. We also have other sources such as the World Bank, African Climate Fund, also kind of contributing towards that. Then the UNFCCC related funding, such as your adaptation fund, GEF and GCF, they're kind of also coming up, but they're only making up about 10% of the projects which have been implemented in South Africa in the past 20 years. Some of the sectors which are emerging and in terms of adaptation projects, mostly we've put here BD is biodiversity. There's kind of those are key sectors which are emerging in terms of the focus of most of the climate change projects, and agriculture and disaster risk management. Then in terms of mitigation projects, we also see electricity generation is also coming up. I think people who are aware of South Africa would know about the renewable energy projects which are currently happening. So part of this project, we are also trying to unpack livelihoods and equity issues which are related to climate change interventions. And we are also trying to assess some of the place-based climate change projects in order to sort of assess from a practitioner perspective whether the selected climate change projects have decreased climate risk, while at the same time also reducing poverty and inequality and promoting equity at all levels, including the local level. Then number two, to also inform the design and implementation of future socially just and transformative climate change interventions. So just as part of this project which you are involved in, I would also want to, for those who are part of this call, to, if you know any projects which you think we might include, particularly in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, I can share a link where you can actually just indicate and give us some contact details, then we can follow up on that, so that we can also just look and compare across countries to see which projects, particularly in urban areas, and to what extent they're actually contributing towards reducing poverty and inequality. After my presentation, I'll actually pop in the link to where you can actually just share some of the projects you are aware of. We might not have picked them in our mapping exercise. That is the end of my presentation, and I thank you. I've provided there is a link to the project website, and also different links to surveys and also the project. I thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. That was really excellent. I think one of the things you asked in that presentation, which really stood out to me, and I think leads quite nicely into what we'll hear from next from Anwisha, is the question, how can climate finance be deliberately targeted to the most vulnerable? I think that's a really pertinent question for what we're talking about today. And then the connection, which was very clear in the presentation we just saw, between reducing climate risk and the connection of that to equity impact and poverty reduction. So I'm going to now hand over to Anwisha Tiwari, who works for Wairu Commission, which is an organization that has a grassroots networks across the Global South that work on resilience building activities. One of the main methodologies they use is the Climate Resilience Fund. And I'm going to hand over to Anwisha, who's going to talk about that, as well as some of their other work in trying to scale up that work to reach even more people. So over to you. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Ariana. Hi, everyone. My name is Anwisha Tiwari, and I work as a Learning and Knowledge Management Specialist with the Wairu Commission. The Wairu Commission is the global movement of grassroots women's organizations working towards grassroots women's leadership and community resilience. And we have a network of women in over 40 countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And our grassroots women members, they work in several communities in rural, indigenous, urban, and peri-urban areas, where we just heard that the risks, the living conditions are very poor, and the climate and disaster risks increases their vulnerabilities. And despite contributing greatly to the local economy, these communities are often not included in the public decision-making spaces and lack access to formal resources to make their decision to improve their situation, lives and livelihoods. So in this context, I would like to talk about the grassroots-led Community Resilience Fund, which is a flexible financial mechanism that the Wairu Commission has created with the grassroots women's contribution to deliver climate finance at the hands of local women's communities in rural, urban, and indigenous communities. And this fund empowers them to make decisions as to what type of investments they want to make that build their resilience, as well as helps in forging partnership with their local authorities. And at the global level, Wairu Commission has also signed on to the locally led adaptation principles, and together with allies like SDI, Climate Justice Resilience Fund, and International Institute for Environment and Development, we are leading the Frontline Funds Accelerator Initiative to try and shift the climate financial architecture and culture of organizations to help to make them partner with grassroots women's and their organizations and local communities by creating evidence of the work, sharing lessons and insights from different grassroots driven strategies. And today I'm going to share some of the examples from our work and also some key lessons. So the Community Resilience Fund has supported a number of initiatives at the local level. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the community risk mapping tool, which is a very important tool that the local communities use to mobilize members in the community and create partnership with the local government. It helps in building consensus around shared priorities. Members are able to also fill gaps in the government data by producing information and knowledge that are often missing at the government with the government records. And it is also a way of creating a mechanism for different stakeholders engagement. For example, in Zambia, the Mungule community, they mapped risks related to climate vulnerabilities alongside land, their relationship to land, and took this data to the local government, who then validated the data, as well as they accepted the data, and in turn women were able to secure land rights in informal settlements. This again helped them to build other resilience practices like food security and livelihoods in the Mungule community. In growth Peru, similarly, members use risk mapping to identify vulnerabilities and share this information with the local municipalities. But they realized that these information were missing in case of with the local government. But this in turn also helped communities to strengthen their partnership with the government, because the government actually acknowledged the knowledge and information brought by these communities and partnered with them, and also committed to allocate resources towards their identified priorities. The Community Resilience Fund also has supported a number of innovative practices like food banks and waste banks led by grassroots organizations in Indonesia and in the Philippines, or upgrading community infrastructure in case of floodings in urban areas. And it has also helped members to create a network of peer learning and transfer their knowledge and practices to other similar grassroots organizations, and as well as build coalitions for developing common agenda for advocacy and strengthen their partnership with the government, which has also resulted in shifting relationships because it has enabled grassroots women to gain trust of their local authorities, local government, and work together to create solutions. I'll give an example. In Quezon City in Manila, when grassroots identified vulnerabilities and due to climate risk and disaster, and they came up with priorities linked to livelihoods, upgrading infrastructure, and waste management, they took this information to their barangay officials, and which helped them to gain partnership with the barangays, and also get formal agreements from the barangay officials to actually resource and look and also help in addressing some of these issues that the communities were facing. And through this local partnership, they are now jointly advocating at the national level for attracting more funds. So there are certain lessons and insights that we have learned from our Community Resilience Fund. The first is this fund has supported grassroots organizations and empowered them to learn and test certain solutions, fail, and as well as build resilience building strategies. These have helped grassroots organizations to strengthen their own funding mechanisms, because often we say that grassroots, there is often a perception that grassroots do not have the ability to manage finances, but this Community Resilience Fund actually helps them to learn how to manage money and strengthen their financial systems to attract more funds that can actually address their priorities. And this has also created a cadre of resilience building experts and leaders who are now working with the government to address multiple risks and priorities. And this has also strengthened trust building relationships between grassroots groups and the government. In Uganda, for example, Swede has the slum initiatives for development has actually they have been incorporated into the municipality as risk experts, and they are being remunerated by the government to address flooding issues in Jinja city, and they have been improving the drainage systems and addressing the issues facing the community together with the government. So these are some of the lessons that we have learned from the use of community resilience funds. But how do we actually think about these participatory processes as a way that can actually strengthen grassroots and government partnership and help in addressing joint priorities? There are many solutions that exist at the local level, and I think it will be really helpful if we can, if the government and can partner with grassroots communities to look at the bigger risks that they are facing, and this can help inform climate investments and decision-making strategies. So partnership is key, and it is important that communities and government work together to co-design solution that benefits both, because communities bring the knowledge and experiences that government can learn from, and use this knowledge and experiences to create mechanisms that allow grassroots groups to engage with the government and co-design solutions. Also, when we talk about risk, we have to understand whose risk we are talking about, because in local communities, they face a multiple range of risks, and that they develop during risk mapping. We have seen that while they go to map a certain kind of risks, they are also able to identify a range of risks, and hence create solutions that actually encompass in addressing this multiple risks. And also there is need for creating alternative funding mechanisms that puts money in the hands of grassroots organizations and local communities to drive innovations and accommodate multiple risks. Lastly, I think it is important for governments to think that investing in local communities is not risky. Rather, if you do not invest in local communities, it becomes more risky, because you have to engage them in developing solutions that best meet the needs of both the government and the community. And there are already bottom-up solutions that you are investing in. You are not reinventing the wheel, and you are not creating something new. These solutions are already there. What government needs to do is identify and partner with grassroots women and local communities and their networks to scale these initiatives. And really, there are many lessons and evidences, but we have to act now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anwisha, for your intervention. Those comments were really, really wonderful. So great to hear about the work that Wairu Commission is doing on the ground. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Andrew Sanjovu of Cities Alliance, who's going to introduce a couple more speakers who have some case studies that they're going to present. Before I do that, I just wanted to highlight a couple of points that Anwisha made that I think actually lead really nicely into the case studies. Anwisha talked about the Community Resilience Fund and the risk mapping that's conducted in order to identify priorities and needs and risks of the communities on the ground, and then build consensus in order to create partnerships, which is so much of what we're talking about today, and how this work at the local level can then be used to advocate for policy change and changes in the way that finance is done at the global level. So I think we'll hear a bit more about that in the case studies that will be presented now, and I'm going to hand over to Sanjovu at this point. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Ariana, for the introductory part of this event. I think it has been so insightful and very, very rewarding. So my name is Sanjovu Andrew. I work with the Cities Alliance as the monitoring and evaluation specialist, currently based in Uganda, Kampala. So our next session is basically going to look at case studies, as Ariana highlighted, and we are going to have a presentation from our colleagues from Slum Dweller International and Habitat for Humanity International. However, before we begin with the presentations, I'd like to highlight that Slum Dweller International has immensely worked with people living in the informal settlements across the globe, and very much known for organizing the slum dwellers into what they call serving groups, and they have this slogan that we are the problem and we are the solution. That information is power. So they have engaged so much into bringing the stakeholders together at the community level, and also empowering them, build their capacity on how they can profile, map, and enumerate settlements. So the communities basically have information regarding all the details and analysis of what this entailed at the community level. This information may not be available at the national level. However, Slum Dweller has gone to the grassroots to ensure that communities are engaged. There is inclusive participation and prioritization of key community-based infrastructure projects that could cause an impact. And in that regard, we have our colleagues from Slum Dweller International who are going to present for us a case study of the Gungano urban Poor Fund that was, implemented in Zimbabwe. And I think it is one of the key things that we're going to look at, and we're going to enjoy, get to learn more about how this was done. However, this is going to be a pitch session. If you have your questions, we shall have a group breakout session where we can ask a number of questions. But we're going to have just a few minutes for our colleague George Masimba, who will present to us what exactly happened in a nutshell of the Gungano Urban Poor Fund. George, please, you're welcome to take the floor.
Thank you very much, friendly Andrew. So I'm going to talk about the experiences from Gungano Urban Poor Fund. Thank you, Andrew, for providing the background to SDI, so I won't go into that. So I work for an organization called Dialogue on Shelter, which is an affiliate of SDI. And I'm going to focus on a community managed fund that we set up here in Zimbabwe in 1998, which is called Gungano Urban Poor Fund. So the Gungano Urban Poor Fund, it's a revolving fund that is managed and governed by the communities themselves. And communities make contributions towards this fund. While it's primarily funded by communities, as an organization, as Dialogue on Shelter, we also help to resource or augment resources within the fund through engaging donors, through engaging the state. So since 1998, the fund has managed to mobilize approximately US $1 million, which has targeted largely slum upgrades in a number of cities here in Zimbabwe. And in terms of why setting up a community managed fund in our cases, Zimbabwe, we had noted that with increasing urbanization and the growth of alongside that growth of informal settlements, the urban poor were facing a lot of challenges in cities. And yet existing financial instruments, or existing conventional rather in financial instruments, could not provide solutions that suit the urban poor, particularly those coming from informal settlements. So this fund came in with designed around the aspirations, priorities, needs, and more importantly, what the urban poor can afford. And also, why again setting up the fund? We felt that considering that a lot of people think that the poor, when they are talking about the challenges that they are facing in their communities, they are not bringing anything on the table. This fund was part of a demonstration towards showing the commitment and capacity of communities in informal settlements to contribute towards something towards the transformation of their settlement. So that's the logic around the community managed fund that we call Gungano Urban Poor Fund here in Harare. And how has it operated and what has it done? So the fund has been used. I'll give an example of a practical example of an upgrade that we have done, where the fund has been used to provide loans for revolving loans for housing construction, low-income housing, putting in place road infrastructure, putting in place drains. And why drains? In most of these informal settlements, because they lie in environmentally fragile places, and whenever there are heavy storms, they are affected by floods. So drains were also part of responses meant to deal with challenges that are associated with climate challenges being faced in the poorer sections of the city. And in addition to that, we had livelihoods also as part of some of the loans that have been given under the Gungano Urban Poor Fund, and also loans to do with urban safety, solar lighting for these communities. And in terms of beyond just providing these financial resources for financing upgrades, the fund is more than that. It has also been used, and more significantly, as an instrument for promoting inclusive governance in cities. How has this been possible? Through the fund, for example, we have been able to then rope in city governments and collectively form what we have called co-created city funds. So this has allowed, for example, to influence the manner in which the city then ultimately allocates resources in terms of urban issues in the city. So that's a very important piece around the community managed fund, that beyond just providing a financial mechanism for addressing challenges in informal settlement, it has been used as an instrument to create inclusive governance mechanisms. And what have been the lessons that we have learned throughout the experiences of the managing and running the fund? Some of the key lessons that we have learned are that resources are critical in terms of building relations. Secondly, co-resourcing transforms the rules of engagement. Normally, it's very difficult for the urban poor to engage the city because of the issues to do with their land tenure status, etc. So when the poor come on the table with resources, it changes the whole dynamics around how they are viewed, seen by the city governments. Then thirdly, there has to be room for mistakes. I think the flexibility around the fund has allowed the Alliance over the years to learn from mistakes, and whenever financiers are partnering communities around climate actions, I think there has to be that commitment and willingness to learn from mistakes when they are co-creating or co-developing financial instruments. Then fourthly, it significantly allows reframing the climate agenda from the bottom up. When communities are part and parcel of financial mechanisms that are meant to respond to issues in informal settlements, then it changes the whole language, the whole understanding, narratives around what exactly is climate change issues when they are seen from the perspective of the urban poor. Then the last lesson, localized decision-making systems improve targeting and prioritization. I was happy that Darlington made reference to issues of how do we deliberately improve targeting for climate finance. So when you have these co-created community-managed funds, you increase the scope for ensuring that the targeting and prioritization is much more sharper. Then the last one, data matters in terms of when you are creating or responding to issues in informal settlement, because underpinning the fund has been issues of collecting data so that it can inform the responses to the challenges that are being faced in the city. I'll pause here. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, George, for that presentation. One thing that I really highlight as very, very critical is the power of the communities coming together, mobilize their own resources, and then begin to implement, community-based infrastructure projects. You talked about, the drainages, the roads, the housing improvement, which is very, very critical. And I think this is where now the communities need to come together with the governments to see how the two can partner together to bring about, improvement in the urban setting, most especially for those people living in the informal settlement. So it has been very, very critical. And looking at the establishment of the revolving fund, which I think provides a bit of livelihood, as you've mentioned, I think it's very, very key. And I've loved the idea, of having, a platform where slum dwellers are able to sit with the government to discuss issues, which was not the case before. I think this has been proven, and it is one of the things that I believe, works very good if we're going to have sustainable development in informal settlement. So thank you very much, George, for that wonderful presentation. Now we shall hear from our colleagues from Tewalega Center for Innovation and Habitat for Humanity International. As you may be aware, Habitat for Humanity International and Tewalega Center have been very, very key in the housing sector globally. As you may be aware, just in Africa only, we have a housing gap of approximately $1.4 trillion that is needed, to construct houses for the people. And as you may know, that people living in the informal settlements have limited access to affordable and decent housing. Many people in our informal settlements find that they sleep under zinc shacks, which are not decent for their living. And they have so many challenges. However, our colleagues from Habitat for Humanity and Tewalega Center for Innovation have done a number of studies to try to understand the impact of affordable housing. And our colleague Nahim Razwani is going to present to us some of the findings in a nutshell of the impact assessment, housing impact assessment that was conducted. Nahim, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be speaking at this wonderful event. While I was hearing other speakers speak about community and the importance of community finance, I thought I'll just try to bring in a different perspective that talks more about why taking the whole market systems approach is equally beneficial when addressing challenges to community development and community housing in particular. So Terwilliger is Terwilliger Center for Innovation and Shelter is part of Habitat for Humanity that focuses on private sector partnerships by working in 3 core areas of development, that is focusing on the labor, material, and the social norms around which the community is. The second part is the housing finance systems, working with just not the financial service providers, which can range from microfinance institution going all the way to telecommunication providers to insurance company, but equally working with the government and the policymakers regulating the financial sector. And last but not the least, the third area that we focus on is working with or trying to promote startups that are entering into the housing finance, the housing space in general, with solutions which may not have been tested before. So in general, Habitat for Humanity, by these 3 initiatives, have been able to mobilize about $781 million into affordable housing space and has delivered technical assistance to 52 financial institutions, serving around 2.5 million people in total. Great. So basically, this whole thing evolved from the concept that was originally launched by Habitat for Humanity under the name called the Microbuild Global Fund. So Microbuild Fund is a $100 million facility, which is one of the world's first blended finance facility that provides working capital to financial institutions to step into low-income housing, but at the same time helping these institutions design products and services through its technical assistance program, again focused towards housing. When the fund was originally established, the two biggest challenges for financial institutions to offer any kind of housing support, housing services was linked to access to capital and having their limited understanding around housing, because the moment you start to use the word housing, you realize that it is much, majority of the world really gets inclined towards the definitions used for mortgage or secured lending. And if you look at the situation globally, particularly in the global south, you realize that the formality of the mortgage financing model is usually not applicable because people are coming in from informal income segments. They do not have enough security available. And in certain cases, they might be living in a house, but may not even have a title available for that house. But that is just one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that the policies and the regulations in those countries are not robust enough to help liquidate if there is a credit loss that happens because a family was unable to pay the financial institutions back. So there's a clear mismatch on what the market requires and what the market can deliver. And that is where Habitat, through its Microbuild fund, stepped in. Again, the whole concept is keeping the clients at the center, and that is where the human-centered design approach comes in, where you try to understand what the behavior patterns and the behavior norms are, and then you look at it accordingly. So basically what happens is that the Habitat for Humanity supports the financial institutions understand what the needs of the market is when it comes to housing, then bundles that up with capital service, again, around the market principles and technical assistance, ultimately trying to increase access to home improvement and home extension activities. So going back to the case study, so this is an institution that is based in Bosnia. The institution is called Sunrise, and when the Microbill invested in Sunrise, we invested about $1 million, and the idea was on the technical assistance side. The need of energy is much bigger when it comes, while it is bigger globally, but I think in the Eastern Europe region, you do have that natural inclination where energy financing solutions or energy efficient solutions are usually looked at. So in 2019, a study was conducted where we talked about two Sunrise products, energy efficiency and home improvement loans. And that was back in 2019. The assessment was intended to really help the partner institution and the industry stakeholders understand the impact of if investment into energy efficient solutions really help people either on the economic front or through saving rates or lower their electricity cost, or the influence of the decision making. And we realized that all these things did happen, but for all these things to happen, it is equally important to take four of the what really has picked up and what has not picked up. And what we realize that housing finance is not a silver bullet. Yes, in certain cases, it does help, but it is very important for the whole ecosystem to come together, you know, to complement each of the activities that happen. Housing finance does help, but yes, it did enhance the capacity of the clients when it comes in the short term. It did indicate that there's an increased role of women in decision making when it comes to housing, trying to implement or identify the solutions that they believe is the best for their houses. And yes, it did help in the short term to improve the potential of diversified livelihood because you had savings attached there. But overall, if you look at it in the medium term, you did not really it was not possible to gauge the impact if the vulnerabilities and the resiliences of the families increased overall beyond something that was financial in nature, or you did not have enough data to really prove your hypothesis. But yes, there was a financial impact that did improve the financial health, and ultimately in the long run, you do see that there was an improved quality of life and well-being at the household and the community level. So yes, there's a direct and an indirect mechanism that comes into consideration, and that is how you look at it. But most importantly, at the community level, one thing that does stand out is if there's a way for people to reduce the amount of investment that they are making on their on products and services to manage their households, or the amount that they pay for various utility service, either it's water, either it's electricity, or something else, providing them that extra saving does impact the overall situation of the family which these institutions serve. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Naheem, for that wonderful presentation. What is important, and one of the things that I've highlighted here in my notes, is that having the support that you're giving to the startup housing institutions that are coming up new, building their capacity, ensuring that we have alternative construction materials that come to market, which gradually leads to the reduction in the overall cost of constructing the house. I think it's something that is very, very important. And please thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Colleagues, right now we are going to break up into two sessions. The first session will be the session around the Gungano Urban Proper Fund, and then the second will be the microfinance impact. So colleagues, please feel free to join any group of your choice, either group one, which will basically discuss and go in detail on the Urban Proper Fund that was implemented in Zimbabwe. And then the second group will be discussing more in detail the impact assessment that the microfinance impact assessment that was conducted by Habitat for Humanity International, together with the Tualega Center for Innovation and in Shelter. So feel free to join any of these groups. However, if we find that one group has very many members as compared to the other, we may request some of you to join the other members in the other group so that we have a balance. So as you join these groups, please, the first thing you do is to select a rapporteur who will take, the notes of your discussions, and this will be presented in the next session that we shall be having. So for group one, this will be led by our colleague George Masimba and Ariana. They'll lead that group, and then group two, we shall have Nahim and Stephen, who will be providing in-depth on the topics that we've been discussing. So colleagues, right now, feel free to join any of these two groups, and feel free to ask as many questions as possible in your respective groups. So back to you, Kata, for the break session.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We're coming to the end of our very excellent session here. Just wait a second for others to reassemble here. Looks like we're all pretty much back, and it's my opportunity to help us close the session, very excellent session that we've had here today. My name is Stephen Seidel, and I'm with Habitat for Humanity International. To close us out, I do want to invite the rapporteurs from each of the breakout sessions that we just left to give us a summary of the conversations that that took place there. So I was in the session on that discussed the microbuild fund from Habitat for Humanity, and Shahila Hussein has agreed to serve as a reporter for that group, and then we'll after Shahila's report, we'll go to the report from the other group. So Shahila.
Yes, so I hope I do justice to this.
You will.
So it was very interesting. I think so Ms. Anita, she gave a quick introduction to the Sunrise program, and just about the whole fact that about all the various methodologies used, and the kinds of outcomes and findings, and how to make this methodology much more robust. So it was a tried and tested sort of an outcome theory-based approach, but the result and very result-oriented. So she also kind of talked about the findings about say the percentage in lower electricity cost, or the percentage of women involvement, and those very interesting sorts of outcomes from this initiative. So one of the questions raised also for during the session was about what is the take forward from such activities. So Naeem was able to just answer about focusing on the experience of the families that were involved in all of these evaluations, and not seeing this as an end of the initiative, but more like a stepping stone towards more better processes. Even mentioned later in the next question about having a microbuild 2 initiative. So that would be with a higher figure to work with. So we had given a question about private investment and blended finance. So what was that all about? So we also got to talk a bit more about the fact that it's a combination of patient investors and commercial investors, and how this was understood as the blended finance model. But that there are these other questions that get explored, like is the all the details of such initiatives. such as the dollar denominated funds, how that affects and impacts the process, as well as understanding what are the kinds of solutions to overcome all of these concerns, and then even looking at the initial investments, then looking at the possibility of different types of investments. So yeah, that was the overall discussions. I hope I was able to capture that well enough. We can't hear you, Stephen. You're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was an excellent report, Shayla. Thank you so much for keeping such close track of the discussion. It was a very rich discussion, which you captured very well. Thank you so much. Do we have a reporter for the Gungano Urban Poor Fund breakout team?
Hi, Stephen. Ariana here. Yes, I will just give a short summary on some of what was discussed in that session. So we had a few of the presenters from today in our session. So we actually got to talk about a few of the different examples. Anwesha was there, and George, and Darlington. So one of the conversations we had was a question that was, with regards to the language around investments that are targeted to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. There was kind of a discussion around what about investments that are, instead of just targeted, but informed by the needs of the most vulnerable. And there was quite a bit of discussion around how both of those are important, and how some of the case studies that we heard today speak to actually both of those needs. So both ensuring that climate finance and investments are, as I think Darlington said, deliberately targeted to the most vulnerable, so that it doesn't kind of end up not reaching them. But also that, especially on the larger scale, when we're looking at investments around climate finance and urban infrastructure related to that, that it's also informed by the needs of the most vulnerable. So that was one of the discussions. And then there was a question specifically around the Gungano example from Zimbabwe, and how that has, or whether that has influenced policy within Zimbabwe to date. And there was a bit more discussion around how it has actually, through partnerships with city councils in a number of different cities. And one example that was given was in Masvingo, which is a really interesting example that we don't have time to go into today, but how that really has kind of put long neglected areas of work back on the radar of city councils and on the municipal budgets as well. So that was one of the discussions as well. And then also how that's been, there's work now around using some of this work and these examples to develop a national protocol for slum upgrading in Zimbabwe that includes these climate related initiatives and related investments. And then just lastly, we talked a little bit about what kind of partnerships are needed to take these local experiences and translate them into larger scale impact and change at the global level. And one of the examples, so there was one comment where that, all sectors need to be included from the outset. So from the beginning of planning and discussions. And then an example that was shared by Anwesha from Wairu Commission, their partnership with the Asian Development Bank, who they've been working with as a knowledge partner for many years. And now the ADB has engaged grassroots leaders in designing and governing a locally led adaptation and resilience efforts, providing them with the opportunity to shape climate finance and programs. So that was one kind of tangible example of that. I think that is enough of a summary for now. Thanks.
Ariana, thank you for that excellent summary and for what sounds like an outstanding and rich conversation in that breakout session as well. We're coming rapidly to the end of our time. Just a quick summary and maybe just a few additions to the reports that Shahela and Ariana just provided. I think what this, for me, and kind of reflecting very quickly on the last hour and a half, what this demonstrates is the necessity and the value of being as absolutely inclusive as possible, especially of and with the communities that are most disproportionately, as we've heard from Darlington, suffering the effects or feeling the effects of climate change in their daily lives, and to involve and create mechanisms for involving those participants with the resources and the capacities that they have, which can inspire and catalyze and leverage engagement from the public sector, and even, as we heard from Naeem, engagement from the private sector. I think a whole a people public-private partnership strategy is what's really called out in the collection of presentations that we've had today. And I've come away really quite optimistic about the prospects of taking this kind of all-inclusive whole ecosystem approach, as has been demonstrated by several and many of the presentations and examples here today, for addressing climate change, especially in vulnerable communities, and generating the financial capacity and the financial resources that are necessary to make significant impacts, especially for those who are most vulnerable. So I really want to thank our presenters for some excellent interventions. I learned a lot here over the last hour and a half. I want to thank our reporters from the breakout sessions as well. And lastly, want to thank all of you for joining this, this exchange and for participating in this very important conference, for which all of us who've been involved in organizing this session have been very grateful to be part of. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you all for your contributions, and we'll continue to collaborate going forward in the months and years to come. Thanks so much.